All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. I'm here with someone who's been on the show, I guess, a couple times now, but in very different contexts. I don't think you've ever actually been on talking about a band you're in. I mean, you've talked about kind of historical bands, and then you were on one of the election episodes we did talking about your candidacy in the last federal election. But I don't think I've actually had you on until now talking about like a current musical project. So it's very cool to have you on the show and to be talking about something something like that. So I think the best way to start this off is if you want to introduce yourself and just give a bit of background about this project, this band you're in now, and we can take it from there.
Sure, yeah. My name is Cam Scott, and I am the singer. That seems like a bit of a stretch. I'm the voice in a hardcore punk band called Age of Self.
And this is a band that it seems to me like it's very new. I mean, I just sort of heard of it out of nowhere a few months back. I saw a brief amount of that show you did at the outdoors of the Broadway Neighborhood Center, and then it seems like since then I keep seeing you popping up on show posters, and you did a short tour. You have a tape out now, which is excellent. And so, what is sort of the genesis of this band? Because everyone involved, yourself included, has sort of past roots in the local punk scene, right?
We've all played a lot and a lot together in different configurations over the years. It's a new band with a long gestation, I guess, preceding this fall when we started to play out quite a bit, because this is an old story that I've heard people tell on this show in different versions. But we started in 2021, so we're a bit of a COVID band, a little bit stymied by the pace of things. When Omicron came at us, we kind of shuddered again, but we'd been rehearsing before that. And furthermore, I think that the resolve to do this band came out of that time because we were all thinking about what we have lost, what aspects of our past participation in music we really wanted to engage
Okay.
fully coming out of it. When we thought about uh, a certain kind of physicality, a certain kind of community ethic, a certain kind of excitement that comes from playing shows, in community with other people, but particularly that we identify with punk music in its many facets. Several of us were playing quite ambient music together. We all have our solo artistic projects, but we really wanted to do something that would be a little more physically bracing or confrontational. For a while, we just referred to it as loud band. Those were the instructions. We just wanted to play at that intensity, and it took a year maybe to get us road ready.
Is part of that just wanting to have a way to like an outlet to let out some of the frustration that's everyone's sort of dealt with over this past couple of years, and because I mean, ambient music, you can definitely I mean, I've talked to people on the show many times about portraying emotion through something like that, which is not as direct and not as obvious, but there's definitely ways to put feeling into that. There are very interesting ways. But when you're playing hardcore, I mean, like you said, the physicality of it, you're throwing yourself right into the feelings and the kind of like, is there a catharsis in getting all of this out on stage?
Absolutely. We wanted to play, I think, at a certain volume and physical intensity for that reason. Also, these recent years have been really difficult, but in a way that it's just the crest of a wave. So many things are coming to a head, and a lot of the frustrations that we want to talk about, I think punk is uniquely apt for portraying a kind of not only not only angst, and the embodiment of that angst, working through that in public in a way that's semi socially acceptable, but also it's an instrument of social critique, or it has been. It has been, and I think that not only pandemic conditions, but the crisis conditions that precede and encircle and characterize the pandemic. Do you know the pace of the march to war, the deepening recession, all of these things become the content of the music in a way that we have a pretty earnest theory of communicative action. You know, punk is a way to speak directly to people, where
Yeah.
a lot of the art, I don't want to mischaracterize the art that we make separately. Uh, a lot of the art we're otherwise involved in is abstractionist. Its social content is um, every music has a social content, but it's not so forthright.
Right. Oh, fair enough. And I think there's always that kind of that idea that whenever things are shitty for the world, whatever the reason, art and music tends to benefit from it in the sense that when you have something that is giving you these strong emotions and these ideas and the desire for change and the want to kind of get that message out to people, it kind of sparks something, right? I mean, if everything was perfect, you're not going to have punk rock is not going to have the same effect. If everyone has everything they need and like it just wouldn't be so powerful.
Absolutely. And it's kind of perverse in that sense that it borrows its power. I don't think it borrows its power maybe, but it's oppositional, in the sense that it has this relationship to a lot of the stuff that it tussles with, or maybe not. My suspicion, and one of the reasons for me, I can only speak for myself, to do this particular kind of band, is that I thought that punk was becoming more socially agreeable and quiescent. That's an ironic word to use about this music, but the kind of thing that happens hermetically in pretty small enclaves
Yeah.
that are themselves so small that they might not be a social concern, but also don't really profess very much social concern. I thought it was becoming nightlife in a
Yeah.
way that, we were kind of deprived of nightlife during the pandemic, such that I wanted it back, but plus,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't.
you don't want to
Yeah,
defang something that is notably fanged, right? I mean, it's it's weird
absolutely.
to have punk that is safe. I guess is maybe I know what you mean. What is it like now? I mean, I know you've been singing in hardcore bands, if you want to call it singing, for a long time now, for decades now, really, right? What is it like now doing this, going back to this after having originally done it when you were much younger and I mean, especially with this kind of content too, your ideals. I'm not sure if how they've changed over the years or your kind of the things you want to talk about on a record or at a show, but is it different? Like, are you looking at things from a different perspective at this point in your life, even though you're doing, sonically similar, loud, angry, fast music?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's changed in a few really interesting ways for me personally, but I think for all of us. One of the things that I am concerned about in terms of my own artistic output. I mean, I enjoy a lot of the records that I've been on and the bands I've been in. So take this with a grain of salt. But there is this quality of nihilism or miserableism to a lot of hardcore,
Sure.
that I don't think it's that simple. I think that the portrayal of these intensely negative intentions and emotions in music is intrinsically constructive. If you're working through it in that setting, it has a constructive social content, almost irrespective of the message, quote unquote. But it is hard to sustain that kind of negative intention toward the world. And I would say at this point, all of us, I feel pretty confident that I can speak for this project as a whole when I say that we have a pretty different intentionality toward this music. It's a total love cry. It's our highest aspiration, and it's a beautiful thing to do together. We
Yeah.
don't we don't want to succumb to the negativity or the nastiness that often attends hardcore. that I've participated in. I think more so than anyone else in the band, but we're doing it with a certain kind of intentionality that like all the interceding experience becomes a part of. I think we're kind of using everything we know. All of the musics that we love are
Yeah.
somewhere in the backdrop of our resolve to play this kind of pretty Spartan music.
Well, it's interesting because I think you're right that that stuff doesn't you can't avoid that happening, right? So whatever you're listening to or whatever you've played over the years and you've been interested in, it's going to seep through in some way or another. But I mean, I think that most people hearing this would hearing the tape would say this is a hardcore band. This is very straight ahead. I mean, this is what hardcore sounds like. But it's interesting to hear that there's obviously, I think with any band really, there's all that stuff in the background that is coming in there, and the fact that you were all doing different music, very different from this band before this, and probably still it's kind of cool to re-listen to it, I guess, with that in mind, and see if it's something that can be picked out. I mean, it's not obvious for sure, but under the surface, maybe there's some of those elements.
Yeah, because I think that hardcore it has negative conditions too. Not I mean negative, not in the sense of the miserablism I was talking about before, but it's nourished also by all the things that it isn't. Its
Right.
purity and intensity comes from the fact that it contrasts so much of the acceptable emotion and range of expression of the world. It's a space where you can really wig out if you need to.
Yeah.
You can be
Yeah.
very strident in a way that you couldn't on the bus or at work or in most situations. But also, that extremity is it's obviously because it's a node of a really really complex musical ecology that I think that's another thing that comes with age is that we all love this music, but the more things that you engage, I feel like the more I love this music for precisely what it is, in relation to all of the other sounds
Yeah.
that we consume that we could be making. We want to play this kind of music, loud band, we want to play this kind of music because of the things that it is so good at and good for.
Yeah. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I think that people often punk rock in general they tend to sort of gloss it over as, oh, it's three chords, it's this 2 minute songs. There's not any substance to it. Just some guy yelling about the government, whatever, right? A lot of people who don't really give it the time to listen to aren't hearing kind of the space in between the 2 minutes of chaos and sort of what's behind it. And I think that as someone who listens to like really unnecessary amounts of reggae, like I mean that's been my kind of genre of choice for most of my life, and it's the same thing. People had this idea of it being this one thing if they don't really delve into it. And I think that the punk and hardcore are the same thing, where it's easy to kind of just pass it over as, oh, that's just simple. It's a couple chords. They're not good at music. It's this, this throwaway trend. But obviously, all of these styles of music have lasted. I mean, hardcore in this kind of form has lasted for decades now, and it hasn't really changed that much. Like, there's always been this appeal to that kind of hardcore. And I mean, same thing with reggae. I mean, there's sounds from the '60s that are still quite popular, and you can still do that now in the exact same way, and it can have the same impact. And I don't know, what do you think is the kind of ongoing appeal of hardcore? Because it really hasn't. I mean, you can listen to your tape and you can listen to something from 1983, and there's differences, but I mean, at the core of it, it's sort of the same basic thing. But there's been so much time and so many different things in between that could have changed it, but it's got this purity to it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could give like a terribly personal anecdotal answer, or like a pseudo scholarly answer, but the thing that fascinates me about hardcore are these two contradictory aspects, right? Where on one hand, it's supposed to be this perennially interesting, refreshing youth culture.
Yeah,
And I can't stake a claim to that. I can't say that I represent it in the guise of like youthfulness anymore, I guess. Um, so glad to have survived that that phase and identify with it in a different capacity. But that's because the rudimentary elements of hardcore are supposed to be accessible to anybody who wants this submersive experience of music. You can pick up a guitar. It's very instrumentally transparent. You can get a drum
Yeah.
set. You can simply howl, and you will discover something like hardcore. But actually, we know it's not that simple, because you're talking about reggae and all the contrasts that comprise this decades old music, right?
Right.
And similarly, we listen to hardcore punk, we know it's not that simple because it's terribly formalized. There's all these like rhythmic conventions and structural conventions. Anybody who lives and breathes hardcore is going to geek out over it in
Yeah.
this hyper referential way, with all of this super granular, almost like geographical specificity. Oh, it sounds like UK 82. It's like US Midwestern hardcore, Boston, LA, these
Yeah.
antennas, that it's pretty well researched, hyper referential music for its alleged spontaneity, right? So I'm interested in what changes and what doesn't change in an idiom that really stands the test of time. I think that in some way it's a school of music, right? Even though it's super unschooled and raw, people are training their ears and their reflexes so that they can become the music that they love.
Yeah.
And you take out so much of that aspirational work when you say, oh, it's this simple brutal music that anybody can play. You can like just ham-fisted, because the way that people approach it, I think, is so much more studied than that, in a funny way. So I really am fascinated with this constant push and pull between the accessibility and immediacy of the music and the depth of the history, and the
Yeah.
fact that everybody who plays it seriously is an amateur historian by dint of immersion.
Yeah, that's really cool because I think that it's almost the same as, I mean, most genres of music have that. I mean, but like jazz, for example, is many degrees more complex just on the surface, and it has that kind of extreme sort of specificity from fans who are listening for very certain things, and they have all this, they can analyze it to the nth degree, and deconstruct the whole thing. But hardcore, I mean, I listen to multiple podcasts that talk about hardcore, in such detail that it's ridiculous that these people are so into it, but they are, and punk and everything else, and just the same as jazz or classical or country or anything else. Like it has this, it has definitely developed kind of a cult following isn't the right word because it does have a cult following, but the historian thing where people are such nerds about it that, and I think they're not trying to be nerds about it. I think they're just, like you said, they're immersed in it, and you know what this breakdown means. You know what that, there's the sound of a certain riff. You know what's going to happen next, or you can predict what's going to happen next. Whereas someone coming to it cold, they're not going to know what the drummer's going to do. They can maybe play the three chords, no problem, but they have no idea what comes after this part of the song. And everyone who's lived and breathed it will know immediately what to do next, or why this is happening, or why the intro sounds like this, or whatever. And I think, not to talk about reggae too much, but it's the same thing. I mean, people hear two chords in some songs and it's repeating and they think, oh, this is the simplest thing ever, but then they can't play it. Like I know
Yeah,
tons of
yeah.
people who are incredible musicians, and they could never play in a hardcore band or a reggae band or a punk band or any of these things that are supposedly simple. I don't think they could do it because they're too trained, almost like they're trained in this technical thing that doesn't have the emotional kind of like wildness, I guess, like the learned wildness of punk rock.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very socialized music, People talk about this in terms of the social scenery, but I really mean it in the sense that, like, the rudimentary materials of the music, like all the micro gestures and the reflexes and
Yeah.
everything, If you really imbibe of this music, you're playing guitar in a way that channels a lot of historical information. And in this music, it's 2022. So hardcore is at least, well, it depends. You can periodize it however you want. Say, I would say it's
It's
probably
40 plus at
40,
this point, right? Yeah.
yeah, 44 years old, let's say.
Yeah.
Uh, because I don't know what this isn't some kind of Canadian nationalism. Let's say DOA made the first hardcore record in 1978. Let's say that. But you're partaking of this super deep music, and I don't think that this is corny to say. You're implicitly honoring forebears, ancestors,
Yeah.
when you're playing a music.
Yeah.
So that's really the gift of it. It's not just that it's raw, unschooled noise. To me, it's a vehicle of cultural continuity that a lot of people have found their footing in.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. So to go back to Age of Self, because we could talk about the meaning and the heart of hardcore for forever. But what's the plan now going forward? I mean, you made it through the pandemic and you remained a band, and well, the pandemic, the worst part so far of the pandemic at least, and you've remained a band. You have this tape out. You've been playing shows. You did a small tour. What's sort of the plan going forward? Are you hoping to record more music? Are you hoping to be kind of more actively playing shows, or is this sort of the pace that you're happy going at right now?
Yeah, I think we're going to keep up the intensity in as much as we're able. I would say for my part, I'm such an admirer of the music that the rest of the band has made. I mean, for this project, but
Yeah.
in general, Joel, Mary France, Sam are some of my favorite musicians. So it's an honor to play with them. And it is a very uh, constantly exciting thing. So we have a lot of music written. This tape, we recorded it live in our practice space, and it was maybe a quarter of the music we recorded wound
Cool.
up on the tape. And we've written a lot of songs since. We're going to record, I think, later this month, possibly for a 12-inch.
Oh, cool.
We have lots of uh, communications with people in different cities and geographies, so we want to keep playing. I think the intent is to do this full bore for a while at least.
That's awesome. Well, and I guess you all have, I mean, things with other cities and that you have connections too, right? From previous bands, and you've all been on tour before, I would imagine, many times over the years. So that helps too, right? If people know of your previous work, kind of individually and collectively, you gave a bit of a leg up, I guess, against another new band starting out that's just doing everything from zero.
Yeah. I mean, to speak of punk as a kind of underdog ethic or what have you, a lot of people seem really alarmed that we sprinted out of the gates. People were surprised that we wanted to start gigging out of town right away, but that's something you can do only within this ecosystem where this
Yeah,
stuff is pretty accessible to you. There's this wild bottleneck right now of people who weren't able to tour or do what they wanted to do during these years of movement restriction, and are now struggling trying to get back at it.
yeah,
The
yeah,
economics are all fucked up. So we are fortunate to be participating at this level where you can go hang out with your friends in any city, and you can make some ungodly noise, and uh, don't really have to belabor the business side of it very much.
yeah. Well, and that's very different than a lot of other styles of music too, where that doesn't exist. I mean, it exists, but in a different way. Punk definitely has that community thing that sort of, you know, every city is connected in some way or another, and people are willing to just like support the community at large.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. We did some shows out west with Pooched and Disposal, who are two great bands from Victoria,
Cool.
and we did some shows on the island in Vancouver. So I think that we're going to play a lot more with Pooched this year, or sorry, next year, and do some more West Coast US stuff this time. Yeah, there's lots coming up.
That's very cool. So at this point, I mean, the tape's out. What's the best way for people to find this music? Is it available on the regular online places as well as the physical
Yeah, I don't think it's on the streaming services that pay
point 002 cent, whatever it is? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, because we're in this to get paid. No, it's not on those quite yet, but it's on Bandcamp, certainly. And we'll send you a tape if you want, but also theageofself.bandcamp.com is the place to find it, and it will be streaming soon enough. Our great friend Steve put it on YouTube. You don't have to pay us to listen to this music. Yeah,
Cool.
please just listen to the music.
Well, and if you do want to pay, there's the tape, which is
Exactly.
worth getting as well. So as far as finding out what's going on in future, like this being a podcast, someone could listen to it this week, or they could listen to it a year from now, and by then, who knows what you guys could have going on. What's the best way to keep in touch with what the band's up to as far as shows or upcoming releases or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can find us on social media. We're on Instagram again, the Age of Self. If you were to search simply for Age of Self, you might get some uh, corny self-help brand.
Yeah, I think I
But
did that by accident at one point, and yeah, it definitely wasn't you guys yet.
well, yeah, it's funny. We're named after a song by Robert Wyatt, "The Age of Self," and for us as well as for Robert Wyatt, the age of self is nothing to be celebrated. You know, it's an age of corrosive individualism,
Right.
and what did I say once? It's the age of quarrel from the standpoint of the individual. So uh, that stuff it's funny to come upon it because it is the very opposite of what we're about. You can find us on Instagram at the age of self, or you can email me if you want to vanishing signs at gmail.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.